The Alabama Booksmith presents Author Spotlight. For 3 decades, our shelves have held treasures signed by amazing giants from the world of literature, brilliant and acclaimed historians, stage and screen superstars, our nation's distinguished leaders, famous sports heroes from many fields, and thousands of other eminent authors. And now, here is our host, Jake Reese.
Welcome. Today we're excited to chat with Ron Rash about his mesmerizing new book, In the Valley Stories and a Novella based on Serena. Ron, how you doing in these crazy times?
Well, as I've told several people, my life really doesn't change that much. I'll go for walks, maybe go into the woods and write. So it's about the same.
Well, one good thing, that gives you time to write. We ought to have 3 or 4 more new books coming soon.
Don't bet on that. I'm slowing down, Jake. I'm not like you.
Come on. Don't slow down. We need another half dozen. You owe us a half dozen. Come on, man.
Whoa. Well, as Dr. Samuel Johnson once said, that's a triumph of hope over experience.
Amen, brother. We sure appreciate you spending part of the afternoon with us. And by way of an introduction to our audience, Ron Rash is not only a best-selling and award-winning author, but he is in that elite atmosphere of those known as a writer's writer. And as evidence to back up that claim, a few decades ago at a private brunch for Pat Conroy during a book conference on Jekyll Island, Pat grabbed me, and when the world's greatest storyteller grabs you, you pay attention. Pat told me this young kid was a superstar, and boy, was he right. A few years later, Pulitzer Prize winner Rick Bragg opened his book, The Most They Ever Had, with a Ron Rash poem. And bringing this theme up to date in 2 weeks, another brilliant young writer, David Joy, publishes his new book, When These Mountains Burn, and dedicates it to, and I'll quote, Ron Rash, my mentor and friend. I rest my case. Okay, Ron, now that I have thoroughly embarrassed you, let's talk about In the Valley. And first things first, the opening story, Neighbors, is a perfect birthing for the book. I found it riveting and actually reread it when I finished. Tell us about the genesis and background for Neighbors.
It was actually, there are several stories I've heard, particularly up in the western North Carolina mountains, because it was so, there were Confederates and Northern, it was very conflicted. And I had heard a story a little bit like that. I changed some things, but what struck me when I wrote it a couple of years ago was it just seemed to fit what was happening in our country. Or the danger of what could happen, where you get that kind of conflict between loyalty to your family, to your community, and as an individual, and it just felt like it was right. And it's a story where I really felt like it went into a pretty complex situation with no easy answers.
Well, you couldn't have picked a better story to start the collection. Thanks for the inside info. Actually, I believe I'll go back and read it one more time.
Well, I hope it holds up.
Done pretty darn good so far. Great start. I know every diehard Ron Rash fan wants to know your decision-making process as to what's next. In case anyone's counting, In the Valley is your 7th collection. You have published 7 books of poetry and exactly 7 novels. does your editor call and say, hey, Ron, how about sending us a novel? Or, hey, it's poetry time. Or does your muse whisper in your ear and suggest short story, short story?
Yeah.
How do you know what's coming next? Or how do you make that decision?
Well, I don't. I mean, that's kind of the strange thing for me is that sometimes I think I'm writing a poem and it ends up being a short story or even a novel. I mean, actually, One Foot in Eden, Saints at the River started as poems, and you know, Serena started as a short story. So, you know, it's weird, but it's just it's like when I finish, the characters aren't satisfied.
Okay.
They tell me, well, there's more to say here, and they won't leave me alone. I know that sounds kind of crazy. I think you've been around enough writers to know that's very often the case.
Well, yours is so evenly split, and just with this publication, I don't know if you're keeping score that it was 7, 7, and 7. And so the next Ron Rash book will give us a little imbalance.
Well, that's true. I hope that that's kind of scary, you know, now that you know, does this mean I've got to do 3 more books or just one?
Certainly 3 more in the next year or 2. Good gosh. With this virus, what else you got to do, man?
That's true. I have been reading a lot.
Okay, well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I know your fans are curious. I was curious. We won't ask you to detail every story in the book, although I found each fascinating and unique. However, I would love to know if Last Bridge Burned had any base in fact.
Yeah, I would say the guy who runs the service station in some ways is like my uncle, but as far as who she really turns out to be, that was one where I just thought, you know, it's weird. I thought of Lucinda Williams and some of those kind of hard living great songwriters, and I just imagined what would it be like that would turn someone around, what sort of person could say something to a young person, such as a young woman, and turn her life around. A man who's not particularly good man, and I guess that kind of ties into a lot of my characters. I think a lot of my characters are in kind of tough situations, but I think they tend to sometimes. Faulkner once said that he thought most people were a little bit better than their circumstances might allow, and I felt like in that story we see a side of this pretty tough, cynical man that I think, as I say, reminded me some of my uncle. But after that, no one from Nashville came calling.
I just wondered if you were basing it on a specific songwriter. I found it, I loved it. It's just terrific. And I know all Ron Rash fans are going to jump around or probably look at the titles and say, oh, that sounds good. I wonder, instead of me hand picking, I'll pick one more. How about telling me the genesis and telling our audience the genesis, or if there's any fact to the belt. I love that. Great story.
Yeah, that just felt like the right story to finish with. I'm glad you liked it. That's a story. Actually, about 15 years ago, I heard a story about a man who had saved a child by actually doing what he does with the belt in that story, and it just has stayed with me. And I have my first grandchild now, and you know, knowing the child was coming, I think that story, as a grandfather, I thought how would a grandfather show his ultimate love for his grandson? And I think that story does that. Yeah, it was a story that there was a flood. There actually was a flood like that in 1916 in the North Carolina mountains, and there were a large. I think it was over 50 people were killed. It was a devastating flood. So that is historical.
I see. You had the grandfather influence to give you a hand with that story. Also, I did not realize that. Come on, I almost want to have you go through each story, but I won't do that. Like every Ron Rash fan, and I know I've been nagging you to do something more with Serena. I've been begging for another dose. What was your motivation for finally bringing back my favorite character in all the world of fiction? How in the world were you motivated to give us more Serena?
Well, it took a few years for me to get over her. She frightened me so much, I wasn't sure if I wanted to write about her or not. Yeah, I didn't want to do that kind of thing where it's like Ghostbusters Part 2. So I really didn't want to do that, but I thought, I've never written a novella, but I really admire that form. There's some wonderful Ponderheart by Eudora Welty, Dennis Johnson's Train Dreams, Faulkner's The Bear. And I love those, I love that form, but I'd never really attempted it. And this book felt like, okay, this will be my chance to do something that's not a novel, but will be a pretty full story, more than just a short story. So that fit. But actually what brought me back to Serena, I think, was as much the story of Ross, the timberman in that story. He in Serena, he's part of that crew, Snipes' crew, but I always felt there was a lot more to him. And I started to kind of realize that he was someone who'd suffered a great loss. And I kind of ran with it from there and, had so much fun. And, I've got a great editor, Lee Boudreau, and she kept on me, and we really worked hard on that, because writing that story was difficult because you have to put some backstory in for someone, who's not read Serena, but you don't want to bog it down. So we worked pretty hard on that.
Well, it sure worked out well, and we're grateful. And I like the way you fleshed Ross out. Do we dare ask, is there any chance of any of those characters showing up again?
I don't know. Maybe one of them will step up and tell me. Snipes is always very fun. He's always fun because he tends to be the kind of Shakespearean wise fool. And he entertains me. So, that he would be fun. But I don't know. I think it's time for Serena to stay in Brazil. She comes back last time. I think one of the great things in the story, it makes it more clear that Rachel and the child, I don't want to give away too much, but we feel better about them at the end of the book.
I don't want to give it away either, but it was satisfying.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Do we dare ask what's next for Ron Rash readers?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm working on some shorter things right now. I'm not sure yet, Jake. I've got a couple of stories, but we'll see. It's kind of, it really isn't up to me. It either shows up and or not. But I'll do my best now that you put the pressure on me with 3 books. So I guess I'll just have to to live with that knowledge. That's good. It'll keep me working, right?
Darn right. We need the books. We have a couple of comments. I continue to embarrass you. Mark says, Ron Rash is my favorite writer. His work is lyrical, thoughtful, and powerful. Nice words. And same guy, Mark, wants to know, what have you been reading during the lockdown?
Oh, well, that's a great question. It's interesting because now that I'm at the age where I am, I tend to go back and reread more than I read contemporary fiction. And so it's been really kind of fun. I've gone back and read some of my favorite novels, which has been kind of, a wonderful experience. Crime and Punishment again, which, is maybe as really wonderful. I've read Carson McCullers' new, I read The Heart is a Lonely Hunter for the first time in 30 years. And I'm stunned at how great a book that is and how young she was when she wrote it. I've been reading some nonfiction on cave art, the story in there about the caves in France during World War II.
Let me interrupt that. And how about covering that? I love that. That was fascinating.
Well, I've always been fascinated. I've been fascinated with cave art. Probably even since childhood. I can remember seeing pictures and finding something in them that really intriguing. But the fact that somebody, our ancestry, our DNA, 35,000 years ago could create great art. I mean, it really is great art. I just find that amazing. And I've always wanted to write about it. I never could quite figure out how. In a previous book, I've had comments about it, but I really thought one day I don't know, it just came to me, what if a soldier saw that during World War II and all that horror? How would he react? Would it frighten him more? And to me, I knew I had a story when I realized, what if it doesn't frighten him? Because those are pretty fearsome beasts on those walls.
Yeah. Oh, well, I would recommend, I've recommended almost every story for folks to start at, so I guess they can go down the line. But the premise was terrific and also a satisfying read. Earlier in the conversation, we proved to the audience that Ron Rash is a writer's writer. We'd like to take this minute to validate that you are also a collectible writer. The foundation of our store is our Signed First Editions Club, and true literary giants have signed for us over the years, many like old Philip Roth, John Updike, the aforementioned Pat Conroy on more than one occasion. However, with the publication of In the Valley, Ron Rash has become our club's #1 selected author, and there's no greater honor we can bestow.
No.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. Wow. I'm gonna tear up, Jake.
Oh, don't cry. Just write another damn book.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I think that's one thing that it's independent bookstores that really got people interested. Your store certainly, and some of the others. So that's always been great, and I just regret that we can't do this personally, but
that's this time. Surely this virus is going away, man.
Yeah, I think well, we just gotta get through it, and as we say, the next book I'll be down there with you.
We're going to count on it.
Yeah, but that's a great honor, and I'm glad. It's interesting when you did Serena. I think that was the first book. You were the first bookstore that did that kind of thing, and actually, that book ended up the first edition. I think it turned where it was worth more than the price paid. So
you kidding? That book is really. If we could talk the publisher into reprinting in hardback, it may not be a first, but it would be a pretty penny to get that. before I get to one more note. Well, I'll get to this question now. An anonymous attendee wants to know, what is your writing routine? Specific time of day, set amount of time?
Well, I would not recommend this. You know, every writer does it different, but I tend to be, I was joking with somebody yesterday and I said, you know, I'm a real Protestant, you know, because if I don't write every day, I feel guilty. And I tend to write, you know, for the last, I'd say last almost 40 years, I've written pretty much, you know, almost every day, and in the last 25 years or so, I'd say I've written 4 to 8 hours a day.
Good, great. That's like work.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's that's the part that my mother-in-law doesn't understand. You know, she thinks I'm just sitting around. I'm teasing. She doesn't think that, but yeah, it is hard work. No, but it's joyful work, and I just feel when I first started writing, you know, I got a few poems in magazines, maybe a story, and I thought if I can just get a couple of books out, wouldn't that be wonderful? You know, that in your life. So, yeah, but I think you know it was very slow for me. I wrote a lot of really bad fiction and bad poetry, and I think that ought to give a lot of people heart because I think it's like, in many ways, it's like anything else. If you're going to be really good, you have to put the work in. I mean, you know, great guitarist puts the work in, and that's not glamorous, but it's, you know, it's kind of what has to be done. So, but yeah, I would say I average now, not as much as I used to, but I would say I get in 4 hours every day.
One more, and then we'll close it out. Marlene Wallace Barrett wants to know, when did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
Well, that's always an interesting question. I think in some ways, I was showing the symptoms very early on because I like to be by myself. And I tended to spend a lot of time outdoors by myself, imagination. And I was a reader, a voracious reader as a child. But I didn't really try to write till I was a freshman in college, or actually a sophomore in college. You know, it's like I just never, it was strange. You know, I think some of my, you know, my good friend Lee Smith had already written a novel by the time she was 8 years old. But I was slower. But yeah, so I don't, you know, I just knew that I loved books. I knew that, you know, a story I tell, which is absolutely true, is when I read Crime and Punishment when I was 15, and I didn't get that book on the level I would now, but it just took me into a place I'd never been. I mean, it was almost like a dream state. The book was so intense, you know, particularly. So I just thought that's pretty amazing that you can do that with just words, that you can have that kind of effect on someone. And so, yeah, you know, but once I got to college, I started dabbling. And then when I got in my mid-20s, my father died. I think that had a lot to do with it. I just felt like, you know, you gotta make a choice. Do you want to really try to do this or not? And so I tried, and for a long time, it looked like I'd made the mistake. But you know, it was better than not knowing if I could do it. I'd rather fail at it. I've never had a problem with failing at stuff.
We won't call you an overnight success then.
No, I wasn't that. You know, my first book in New York I was almost 50.
Oh, gee, well, this is the last question. Actually, it's more of a comment. Marlene again said she's had the pleasure of hearing you speak a few times and has never forgotten a story you told at Quail Ridge about your grandfather reading Cat in the Hat to you, and when you were growing up. So we'll get rid of this virus, and your next book, you'll come here in person and tell us the story of your grandfather reading Cat in the Hat to you.
Well, it's a great story. I think you already know it, but you want me to give us a synopsis?
Give us a synopsis, you bet.
Yeah. Well, when I was 5 years old, my grandfather, my parents had gotten me a copy of The Cat in the Hat, and they'd read it to me, I don't know, 20 times. And one day we were at my grandparents' house, and I had the book, and I gave it to my grandfather to read to me. So he set me on his lap, and he started, reading the story, turning the pages, and the cat was getting into, a different kind of trouble. The kids were saying different things, and I thought, well, that's pretty cool, The cat was, looking at, possible jail time, and so I asked him to read it again the next week, and it was different, what I found out, a few years later was that he couldn't read or write, so he had made it up. He was too proud to let me know he couldn't read, so he just kind of made up the story. But that was such a great, moment as far as what imagination can do. Yeah.
Well, now that you're a grandfather, we'll hope you'll stay at it for a long time to come.
This book, In the Valley, is dedicated to my grandson.
I saw that at the dedication.
Yeah.
We spoke earlier of our Scion First Editions Club, and a huge number of our members are watching. So will you join me in giving a shout out? Hi, guys. Thanks for watching.
Well, thanks for watching, but also thanks for supporting me and Jake. I mean, I think independent booksellers and writers have a symbiotic relationship. We help each other out, or we hope we do. But is it okay if I finish with the ultimate Pat Conroy story?
Oh man, what a great way to go out! Should we get?
Yeah, because speaking of the fact that I've got a readership now, and all these people have bought my book with your help. I was when I first knew Pat, I was I think it was one of my books anyway. I did an event where there were only 3 people who attended. The person who introduced me, his friend, and a rather irate nun. When I brought up Flannery O'Connor, she didn't think much of Sister Flannery. But anyway, so they had my books there at the library. So these 3 people showed up, and one of them fell asleep while I was doing my little 15-minute reading, and so I didn't sell a book, and so I saw Conroy I don't know, this happened about a year later, and I said, I have the worst book signing story of all time, and I told him that story. I said I didn't even sell 1 book, Pat. You can't top that. And then Pat did what he had always said this. He said, "Oh, no, no, no." And I knew he was going to have to find a way to top it. That's just the way Conroy was. But he said when his first book was The Boo, which was self-published. And he was at some bookstore, I think in Charleston or somewhere down on the South Carolina coast, with his, book that he paid to get published and put on, and he had about 10 copies out there. Anyway, for like 2 hours, nobody was interested. Finally, this guy came and kind of looked at the book, read a couple of pages, talked to Conroy, Conroy talking to him. And after about 15 minutes, he said, "Okay, I'm going to buy this, but, can you sign it for me first?" And so Pat signed it, to my friend, whatever, Pat Conroy. And the guy was going to the to cash out and buy it. And he'd taken a couple of steps and he fell over and died. Right. And so Pat he said, "That's -1 because the book, I couldn't sell the book now because I'd autographed it." And that was the last time I tried to top Pat Conroy. I just gave up.
That is, I can't believe, I thought I knew every Pat Conroy story. That's incredible. I said I wasn't going to read anymore, but we just got this. I've got to let the audience see. It's from Wake Forest, North Carolina, from Brian. And he says, wow, after hearing your story, wow, I only recently discovered that my grandfather couldn't read or write. So that's so powerful. Ron, we are grateful to you for this afternoon, for all the books you've written and the ones you're gonna write.
Okay.
And we thank you for signing our books. Thank you for spending the afternoon with us. Stay well, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Well, thank you, and thank Mike for working me through Zoom, because I have no technological ability, so we had to really struggle. I finally got my neighbor to come over, and he figured it out in about 30 seconds. But it was great, Jake. I hope to see you soon. Take care. Everyone stay safe.